Well, today, July 1st, was the rumored date that the Israeli government would officially annex the West Bank, making official what has long been clear, that Israel is an apartheid state. Now, there is quite a bit going on with this announcement and when exactly it will be made. But over the past month, we have seen all across Palestine, quite frankly, all around the world, significant protests that have been happening there. Really all across Gaza, all across the West Bank, Germany, here in the United States, really everywhere there has been a significant outpouring of anger around this institutionalization of the current apartheid reality in Israel. To discuss this and some of the broader issues involving the occupation of Palestine, we were able to speak with Mnar Muhawesh, who is the editor-in-chief of Minneapolis News. Well, Mnar, thank you so much for joining us here on Breakthrough News.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the first question I wanted to pose to you here is maybe just to set the stage a little bit for people on the issue of annexation. I think a lot of what many people in America may have heard is when and if Israel goes forward with this move, it will be the establishment of apartheid. I think others have said that maybe it's just an extension of the status quo. So, I mean, how do you see this annexation action? Is this a big change for Israel's behavior as it concerns the occupation, or more of an extension of what we have seen over the years?
No, this is absolutely going to be more of what we've seen over the years. And it's important to define the word annexation. It's being thrown around a lot, and we have to define it. Annexation is a term used to describe when a state, and in this case, it's the state of Israel, when it unilaterally seizes another territory within its border. So this is basically, through the definition, it's very clear through this context that Israel is basically stealing land that doesn't belong to it and making it part of its ethnocentric state. So it's just more of the same occupation enabled by Western powers, and this will, without a doubt, create another humanitarian crisis, pushing the West Bank to become the next Gaza.
You know, we've seen obviously some potential delays, at least in this pushing forward, in the context of, huge mass mobilizations in Palestine, many places around the world. I mean, what do you think the role of international forces in opposition to Israeli actions like this are in, helping create the conditions on the ground to promote Palestinian liberation?
Well, this is territorial conquest and occupation as defined by the United Nations Charter, and it's illegal under international law. So we're seeing a mass mobilization within the Palestinian territories of Palestinians marching for the past several months since the Trump, Kushner, Netanyahu-backed supposed, deal of the century was announced. And even the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, declared it illegal and disastrous. And it's because 35% of this Jordan Valley area is going to be taken over by Israel. And it's really important to understand the context of this and why this is causing such outrage. Apart from the expansion of military occupation of over 65,000 Palestinians who live there, this will, we have to understand that the Jordan Valley and the West Bank that's currently being spotted in the so-called deal of the century, this is where major water and fertile land for agriculture stands for Palestinians. It's where they get access to clean water. So it's no question that Israel is trying to steal more Palestinian resources to make it their own. This is the most fertile land in the region that connects to the Jordan Valley, where major water sources are available to Palestinians. And then we have to think about what else they're trying to do. They're trying to encircle the entire West Bank region, putting it in full control of its apartheid regime. If Israel controls the Jordan Valley, it will control the Palestinians' border with Jordan. No airport in the West Bank exists. The only other airport that existed for Palestinians was actually in Gaza, but it was bombed in 2001 under Operation. I forgot what operation it was, but one of the operations that Israel committed against the Gaza Strip. And so Palestinians are now going to be trapped in what's going to be created into another enclave, very similar to what Israel is already doing in Gaza. And we have to think about this from a humanitarian perspective, because if Israel is now taking over all of the Palestinian access to water and agricultural resources, and then also controlling Palestinians' travel and movement, it's going to create another ghetto. And Gaza now is considered the largest open air prison and ghetto in the world, with over 2 million Palestinians stuck there. We have more people that live in the West Bank. And so this is going to create an even bigger ghetto. It's going to create another humanitarian crisis. And so this is going to create more instability in the region. But this is, of course, very good for people like Trump and Kushner and Netanyahu, the Netanyahu government, because what this will allow is for the expansion of illegal Israeli settlements and more funding and profits for the military industrial complex for Israel. It's going to continue to expand its occupation and increase its partnership with the security state here in the United States.
Well, I think that's such an important question in terms of the partnership with the United States. And I mean, obviously, or at least I hope it's obvious to people, the impunity that Israeli officials act with is so heavily conditioned by their total support by the United States. But, one issue that has also become, much more in the forefront, given the context of the uprising happening in this country against police brutality, is the issue of the IsraelUS police exchanges. Now, you are there in Minneapolis, and there's been some controversy that has sort of erupted over the fact that the Israeli police have also been filmed using similar sorts of tactics as the tactic, the knee in the neck that was used to assassinate George Floyd. And whether or not there is an exact one-to-one there, which I know is what the controversy has been, it does seem like an important opportunity to maybe just reaffirm, and I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about this close, tight partnership between the occupation forces in Israel and police departments here in the United States.
Well, the United States is the largest superpower in the world, and Israel is one of its client proxy states. It's the reason why the military-industrial complex is profiting and expanding around the world. And so we all know that Israel is exporting its brutality in training police forces around the world, whether it's in Mexico or Colombia. I mean, and even within Saudi Arabia, and helping Saudi Arabia in its occupation and bombing spree in Yemen. And so when we think about the brutality of the Israeli war machine, it would come to many people as a surprise to know that same brutal country that's engaging in apartheid, occupation, and major human rights abuses is actually holding training sessions in Israel to train the American police forces. And I believe it was in 2012 when Minneapolis police departments, and we still don't know if Derek Chauvin, the killer cop that murdered George Floyd in Minneapolis, we still don't know if he was present at this conference. But in 2012, there was a major conference for police training, American police forces from Minneapolis in Israel. And that is where we believe a lot of the brutal tactics that are being used by Minneapolis police forces and the greater U.S. police state system, where they're learning a lot of their brutal tactics. And if we look at the way Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd, he was kneeling on his neck. And I don't know how many images that have been seen from Palestine since the inception of the state of Israel, since 1948, of images of Israeli soldiers and police kneeling on Palestinian, not just adults, but children. I mean, thousands upon thousands of children have lived under the brutal bootstrap of the very brutal Israeli military machine. And so Israel has been using these very inhumane tactics to control, to intimidate, to brutalize Palestinians for so many years. And now we're seeing that taking place here in America, in a country that we supposedly uphold democratic values and human rights. But clearly we're taking lessons from a very brutal occupying, apartheid ethno-state. And so this should really concern every American that is worried about human rights.
Mnar Muhawesh, the editor-in-chief of Mint Press News, thank you so much for giving us this context and joining us on Breakthrough News.
Thank you very much.